We have a very interesting report that came out earlier today that I want to kind of get into related to Deion Sanders and him potentially becoming the Las Vegas Raiders' next head coach. Deion Sanders, if you guys have not heard, is apparently heavily considering leaving Colorado and becoming the next head coach of the Las Vegas Raiders. Now, what's interesting is Deion Sanders has publicly stated that he would definitely consider going into the NFL and leaving Colorado if it came down to him being able to coach his sons. Right, Shador Sanders is probably one of the top two quarterbacks in this upcoming class. His son, Shiloh Sanders, is also a pretty good safety. I know some people hate on him, but Coach Sanders has apparently expressed interest in some NFL jobs. And Vincent Montanore, who's the Las Vegas Review-Journal's beat reporter that covers the Raiders, put it out there that Deion Sanders apparently expressed interest in the Raiders coaching job. And it's kind of interesting. I want to show you guys what this guy said about the entire situation. So he put it out there saying, Colorado football coach Deion Sanders has his eyes on the Raiders coaching job, according to a person with knowledge of the situation. He has a very strong interest in the job, this person said. The person indicated that NFL connected associates of Deion Sanders reached out to the Raiders to express Sanders' interest in the opening. So what Vincent Montanore is ultimately saying is that there's associates of Deion Sanders, and through those associates, they've reached out to the Las Vegas Raiders. And they've made it known that this guy wants to coach for the Las Vegas Raiders. Now, this is interesting, right? Because if you think about some of the coaching candidates that the Raiders have right now, right? Guys like Aaron Glenn, who's the defensive coordinator of the Detroit Lions, runs a very, very good scheme. Ben Johnson, arguably one of the best offensive coordinators in the NFL. There's a couple other guys, right, that the Raiders have reached out to and interviewed. Pete Carroll, Robert Saleh are kind of coming up as well. Steve Spagnuolo runs a really good defensive scheme for the Chiefs. Those five guys are set to 100% interview or have interviewed already, right? But according to Vincent Montanore, Deion Sanders just put it out there, right? I want to coach for the Las Vegas Raiders. And this got a lot of people talking, right? Like, should the Raiders actually bring in a guy like Deion Sanders? Like, does it make sense? Does it make sense to go with the same type of head coach that basically Antonio Pierce was, right? We got to realize that when you hire a guy like Ben Johnson, or when you hire a guy like Aaron Glenn, these guys run an entire side of the football, right? There's an offensive side, there's a defensive side, right? These guys run the entire half of what you have to run to have success. And with Coach Prime, and this was true with Antonio Pierce, these guys did not call plays or design an entire side of one side or the other, right? Deion Sanders does not call defensive plays, nor has he ever built and installed, on the defense side. Maybe in high school he did, or jobs in the past, but at Colorado, he definitely did not do that. Deion Sanders was very, very similar to what Antonio Pierce was for the Raiders, right? We had Patrick Graham running a really good scheme for the Raiders, and it wasn't Antonio Pierce that really put that scheme and system. It was Patrick Graham. And then, of course, on the offensive side, it was kind of whichever offensive coordinator it was at that point. So should the Raiders kind of go with that strategy again, right? I personally would not do it, but we did get an update today, and I kind of want to touch on this update. This update comes out essentially from The Athletic. Now I want to show you guys what this report ultimately says, right? So this is Deion Sanders may have interest in the Raiders head coaching job, but the Raiders apparently have zero interest in the Colorado head coach. That's the word from The Athletic, with Vic Tafur and Tashawn Reed speculating that Sanders is merely using the Raiders for leverage. Now, the zero interest that the Raiders have in Deion Sanders, The Athletic basically is saying that they have sources that are saying that the Raiders are not interested, right? And the only sources that could really be, if they are true, is going to be the Las Vegas Raiders themselves. So essentially you have Deion Sanders who's interested in the Raiders, and then you have the Raiders that are apparently not interested in Deion Sanders, which kind of shuts down the entire thing of the Raiders potentially hiring Deion Sanders. So there you guys have it, right? Basically the Raiders will not be going forward with Deion Sanders. And I don't hate Coach Prime. I think he's a good coach, but the thing for me is, as a coach like Coach Prime, right? And you can use Mike Tomlin as a good example as well, right? Because Mike Tomlin does not run the offense, nor does he run the defense. Although you can have success and you can make the playoffs and you can be a good football team, the same way with Mike Tomlin, who's, yes, he's had winning seasons, but he hasn't had the success that other coaches have had, right? Like, for example, Kyle Shanahan's been to multiple Super Bowls and he's been coaching a lot less than Mike Tomlin. Sean McVay's been a coach for like 6-7 years. He's already won a Super Bowl, the same amount of Super Bowls as Mike Tomlin over however long Mike Tomlin's been here. And I don't think Mike Tomlin's a bad coach. He's a good coach. But I think at the end of the day, when Mike Tomlin hires a great offensive coordinator that might be able to potentially get them into the Super Bowl, I think what's going to end up happening is that offensive coordinator is going to end up getting picked and hired essentially as a head coach for another team, right? It's the same thing we're going to see with Ben Johnson leaving the Lions at some point. It's the same thing when Kyle Shanahan left Dan Quinn back in the mid 2010s when he was with the Falcons and he ultimately ended up leaving. At some point, these type of coaches, if they don't run one entire side of the field, right, either the offense or the defense, it makes it hard to always hire two guys running either side, and then those two guys actually being really good at what they do, right? To me, if the Raiders want to have success, you cannot hire a guy like Deion Sanders. And again, I'm not saying he's a bad coach. I actually really, really like Deion Sanders. I think that works more so for college as opposed to the NFL, right? In the NFL, you got to run the best scheme. And oftentimes, the teams running the best schemes are oftentimes the best team, right? In my opinion, that's kind of how it is. And nonetheless, it is still interesting if you think about it because, Tom Brady right now is the guy that's kind of giving Mark Davis, the scoop on things, right? Tom Brady is the one that's kind of putting it out there that, hey, we're going to bring in Ben Johnson. We're going to do our due diligence and we're going to try to hire this guy as our head coach. And I'm not going to lie to you guys. I did not think Ben Johnson would have taken any sort of interview with the Raiders. And honestly, I think if Tom Brady was not here, he probably would not have, because Ben Johnson can pick whatever team he wants, right? The Bears want him. The Jags want him. I think the Patriots would have probably hired him as well if he showed any sort of interest in that job. And, to me, I feel like Ben Johnson, it would have made a little bit more sense to go to a team that already has a quarterback, right? Like, for example, the Chicago Bears or even a team like the Jags who have Trevor Lawrence locked in long term. And then when you think about the Raiders, not only do they not have a quarterback, but there's really not a quarterback that's in sight for you to even bring in, right? The number one overall pick's most likely going to be Cam Ward, at least according to the early reports. And if Cam Ward goes one, chances are we're going to get another quarterback off the board before the Raiders even pick, right? So the Raiders not only don't really have an option at quarterback, but it just doesn't look good. And when you consider all those different things, I didn't think Ben Johnson would even have any sort of interest. But there was even a report yesterday that in some league sources, and I forget who it was that reported this, but Ben Johnson's actually a lot more interested in the Raiders job than what people had initially believed. And I'm one of those people. I did not think Ben Johnson would want to be with the Las Vegas Raiders. Now, if the Raiders don't hire Ben Johnson, right, let's say he ends up taking the Bears job or the Jags job, right? I think those are two of the jobs that he's probably going to consider heavily, and then the Raiders are probably third. If he doesn't take one of those other jobs, or let's just say he does, right? There's still good coaches out there that the Raiders could potentially hire, right? I think Pete Carroll would be a really good coach for the Raiders to potentially bring in, because Pete Carroll's a really, really, really good coach. Now, in the past, Pete Carroll has won a Super Bowl. He's had a lot of success. That was obviously with Russell Wilson on his rookie contract. They moved off of Russell Wilson. And then from there, they kind of went towards Geno Smith. And they had a little bit of success with Geno Smith as well. I think Pete Carroll, generally speaking, is a good coach. But would he be able to help the Raiders get over the top, right? And that's kind of what we need from a coach, right? We need a guy that can really put together a good staff and get us over the top. And if it's not Pete Carroll, Steve Spagnuolo runs a really, really, really good defense. And I'll be honest, guys, considering the fact that we play Andy Reid, considering the fact that we're going to play Sean Payton, those are two really good coaches. Both guys have made the playoffs. I think a guy like Steve Spagnuolo could help you beat those type of teams within the division, right? Because Steve Spagnuolo runs arguably the best defensive scheme in the NFL. And in my opinion, the Chiefs aren't winning the Super Bowls or having the same success that they've had without Steve Spagnuolo. In my opinion, I really, really think that. Because this guy's one of the best coaches in the NFL, coaching that defense side of the football. And if the Raiders make this guy their head coach, you got a guy that can run that scheme. Maybe he calls plays, maybe he doesn't. It wouldn't really matter because he's still going to have that influence on the defense side of the football. From a scheme perspective, right, Steve Spagnuolo blitzes. He runs a lot of match coverages. If the Raiders hired Steve Spagnuolo, that's another guy that could ultimately end up hiring a good offensive coordinator. And you can have success that way as well, right? Obviously, for me, it's always going to come down to, I think Ben Johnson makes the most sense because he calls offensive plays. We also interviewed Aaron Glenn, who runs a good scheme, considering how many guys have been hurt for the Detroit Lions. He's obviously doing a really good job as well. And then Robert Saleh's coming in. I think for an in-person interview. I believe it's in the next couple of days. So maybe the Raiders go with the defensive approach, right? Because it seems like they're kind of bringing in more defensive guys as opposed to offensive guys, or maybe they're gonna potentially look out and bring a couple more offensive guys in as we kind of go forward. I do like the fact that Tom Brady is giving that input, and I do like the fact that these other coaches out there are at least giving the Raiders an opportunity. Now, I don't know if it's because of Tom Brady, but that's what the reports are, right? So, I guess Deion Sanders won't be the Raiders coach. I'm okay with that, but hopefully they're able to land Ben Johnson. We'll see what ends up happening. I'm sure over the next week, we're going to get so many different reports that are coming out. I will have a video here over the next couple of days talking about some of the general managers that the Raiders have either reached out to. We have, official reports of some of the guys that the Raiders have reached out to. Plus, if they have anything set up, we'll kind of get into that. We'll kind of break down some of these guys. I personally still don't agree with the Tom Telesco firing, but it makes sense. Right? Ben Johnson's going to be your coach. If he's the guy that comes in, Ben Johnson's going to want his own guy. He's going to want to be with someone he's familiar with. Because for him, he's always going to look at it like, hey, I need to be able to give input to how this roster is ultimately constructed, right? And that's 100% understandable. So we'll see what ends up happening. Let me know what you guys think, man. Thumbs up, subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time with another video.